Welcome, everyone, to the February online seminar. We're glad you're here tonight. I'm Mitchell Kent, and I'll be your host for this evening. Before we begin, I have a few brief announcements. First, TNPS will once again offer guided field trips to a variety of locations across the state and the region. This year, we have more than a dozen trips planned starting in late March and continuing through September. Uh, Details with registration information will be posted on the TNPS website very soon. TNPS will continue to host these online seminars on the third Tuesday evening of each month. Information about upcoming programs is posted on our website and Facebook page periodically, and we hope that you will plan to join us for future sessions. Now, if you missed a session, you can view it later on the TNPS YouTube channel. Finally, if you have questions during this evening's presentation, please enter them in the chat, and we'll set aside time at the end of the program to address as many of those as we can. So now let's go on to tonight's program. I'm pleased to introduce Ciera Wilbur as our presenter for this evening. Ciera is the Southeast Regional Manager of Old Growth Forest Network, where she oversees the growth, enhancement, and connection of the network's forest sites across multiple states in the southeastern United States. In this role, she is dedicated to expanding awareness and protection of old growth forest by connecting people to these vital natural areas. Her work focuses on fostering a network of forests that promotes conservation and provide public access to mature forest ecosystems. Her role involves coordinating efforts to secure and maintain old growth forest sites and engaging communities to appreciate and support these irreplaceable natural habitats. As part of the Old Growth Forest Network, Ciera helps inspire environmental stewardship and awareness of ecological importance of old growth forest in the region. Overall, Ciera Wilbur contributes to conservation through her leadership in managing forest networks that connect people to ancient forests for education, enjoyment, and preservation purposes. Ciera, welcome, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Mitchell. That was a wonderful, wonderful introduction. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Can I get a thumbs up if you can see my screen? Great. Alrighty, yes. So yes, like Mitchell mentioned, my name is Ciera Wilbur. I'm the Southeast Regional Manager with the Old Growth Forest Network. The states that I cover are Alabama, Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And so I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Mitchell. And I'm really glad, thank you all of you for joining us here tonight as we have this discussion about Tennessee's elder trees, what the forest history is, what you can do to participate, and what the mission of the Old Growth Forest Network is. So thanks for joining us tonight. And so before we dive in to anything technical, I'd like you to join me to Once Upon a Tree Time. Not so long ago in the span of time, but the eastern seaboard was once a ocean of vast forests from the coast all the way to the Mississippi. So from the coastal plain to the Piedmont, up over the Appalachian Mountains, all the way into Tennessee and the Mississippi River, the eastern United States was home to many different types of forest ecosystems and hosted all sorts of different life forms living within these forests. And so as we enter into the forest and you experience these ancient forests with large, large trees, you might notice that the temperature changes and there's a moistness in the air and there's the smell of hummus on the forest floor, and you can hear but maybe not see all of the creatures around you. And so you look up into the canopy and there might be birds flittering around. There's rustling on the forest floor around you. And if you listen really closely, you might even hear the amphibians like salamanders and other insects crawling underneath logs. And if you listen even more closely, you might be able to hear all of the life forms that are existing within the soil decomposing as you smell, the rotting wood, the smell of dew, and the smell of the herbs and the different plants in this place. And so, looking out as far as you can see is just forest, this vast forest. That was what was here not too long ago. And so, thinking of that, this is a rather popular image, so I'm curious, some people might have seen this, but it basically shows the area of virgin forest from pre-colonial settler time to present, right? And so at the top left, we see that vast, endless forest, basically, of the eastern seaboard going from the Atlantic coast all the way across the Mississippi. But then moving downward, about 2 centuries later, still significant amounts of
Where's the
primary
audio button?
forest um, growing up all the way into like across across from the Atlantic and into the Mississippi, but you can see that it's becoming more sparse. And then moving up into the 20th century at the top right, 1920, you can see that the area of virgin forest, primary forest areas that had never been cut is now drastically decreased. And then to the bottom right today, it's believed that there is less than 1% of true old growth primary forest left. And so, what that has to do with is the forest management history throughout the Southeast. And so, pre-European settlement in the 1600s and before, this land was managed and lived in by indigenous peoples who were using the land. Working with the land, right, clearing some places, creating a mosaic of habitats for not only their game, but in some cases their own agriculture systems that were in use by indigenous tribes. In a lot of cases, fire was invited, some cases started, but also not suppressed. And that created a mosaic of landscapes and forests that were fire tolerant, allowed the fire was allowed to continue through, and it created a diverse setting of many different habitats in these very different types of forests that we see throughout the East Coast. And then, after that, after we have the advent of European settlers arriving in the United States, European settlers needed to build their homes. These homes were made from wood. And so that was when we start to see more of the forests being cleared. We also, the European culture also required large areas be cleared for agriculture, for the livestock and animal husbandry that came along with European settlers for grazing. And so, at this point, these primary forests were still very large and vast and going as far as the eye can see. And so it still didn't really seem like it was possible to run out until that is the advent of the industrial age, right? And so the late 1800s, following the Civil War, we have this industrial revolution really taking off, right? And so we have the railroad network, we have the advent of electricity, and now steam-powered machinery, which is enabling large scale and intensive logging. And so that's when we're going to see large swaths of land being cleared and hauled off into other areas for use in building our new cities, as well as expanding the railroad, and especially when it comes to longleaf pines and pine trees, right? Those really straight, tall pine trees and other eastern hardwood species that also grow straight and tall. And so, yeah, this is when we're seeing this severe degradation of the forests. And fortunately or unfortunately, that didn't last too long before people realized we're running out of forests. This seemingly endless resource of forests we were running out, and there were significant environmental impacts like landslides because now there were, no trees on the landscape to hold things. And so this is the early era of conservation. This is the era of John Muir, as well as Gifford Pinchot, and the establishment of the National Park Service and the U.S. Forest Service. And so these large swaths of land were basically kept for sort of national security purposes set aside, and the advent of this new scientific, more ecological approach to forestry began in the United States. And so the very basic early guidelines for reforestation and management of forest was beginning. As well as planting seedlings. That was something that hadn't been done before, but replanting forests after they were removed, they were harvested. Um, and this is also the era where, this continued fire suppression and the awareness and a more intense perspective on fire started to arise. Up until modern day in the 1990s and to present, we have far more knowledge and research and science available to us now to understand how to better manage forests, not only for timber and for profit, but also for recreation and for wildlife and for water protection. And so forest management has become, there's many different schools of thought about the way to do things, but we're moving into a way, moving into best management practices that are adopted across different industries and management ownership, different private ownership and forestry organizations. And so, yeah, that is a good step forward. And still, there are other challenges that our forests face today. And so while clear cutting may not be as popular as it used to be, there are other challenges facing our forests. One, we are aware that the climate is changing. And so, the health of our forests and the way that they're managed really is important in thinking about how they're going to be able to withstand and have resilience against a changing climate. As well as invasive species, right? And so two that we're very aware of that are impacting in the southeast are the emerald ash borer that have pretty much significantly removed the entire population of ash trees, as well as the southern pine beetle, which then go in and exacerbate issues like fire, right? And in places where fire suppression has had a history, and then you have a fire come in, we start to get those really large fires. But all that said, it's really promising looking forward and seeing what we know now, what we're still learning, and what we're moving forward with. And so that's how we get to this map today. And so just like to mention, so the last map that we saw with the lots of white space, that was just showing us the area of virgin forest that was left. This map was created by us at Old Growth Forest Network, and it's a more accurate representation of where forests exist in the United States today. And so you can see that, the Southeast actually is more forested than that map shows. And there is still some old growth left. Definitely not as much as we would like to see, but there are pockets of it. And you can see, a lot of places in the Southeast, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Eastern North Carolina. These are places where the trees are a lot younger, right? So there was a little bit more intensive forestry during that time. And then if you look at Tennessee, you can see that there are some pretty significant spots. I know that this image isn't great, so let's move on to this one. This is a close-up of forest maturity in Tennessee. And so again, this map is showing us not all of the forested areas, but the mature forested areas. And so if we look at the legend on the bottom left of this map, that's showing estimate like 70 plus years old on that gradient. And so you can see here that obviously there is some mature forest left, and mature forest might be mature second growth. And so after that initial cut, during the initial settler era, this may be stuff that has grown back, and there are probably pockets of true old growth that exist in these areas. And another thing to be aware of is that another thing for threatening forests is development. And so I'm sure, some of y'all around Nashville or Knoxville or Memphis, right, areas where there's significant development pressure, that's something else to be aware of that threatens forests. And that's why it matters that we are discussing forests today. And so when we're thinking about forests, forest is a very broad word, right? There's many different types of forests, and those are usually going to be based on the different types of trees and species that are existing in them. And so just to simplify our conversation on that point today, I wanted to introduce the ecoregions of Tennessee. And so this might be something, anyone want to show a hand if you've seen or know about ecoregions? Great. Yeah. This is just one way that we are able to kind of collect large areas, collect information, and put it on a map. And so many different ecoregions in Tennessee. And so here are a few of them. And so I'd love to see if we've got some hands who's living in each of these places. And so first, far to the west, we've got the Mississippi alluvial plains and the Lowest Plains. And so, right, this is going to be floodplains close to the Mississippi River. And so these are going to be much more, much moister areas where we have bottomland hardwood forests. And so some of the characteristic trees in those forests are going to be water-loving oaks, and sweet gum trees, as well as swamps and marshes where you have bald cypress and tupelo trees. And so this might be a rather small ecoregion in Tennessee, but it's still really important for these species that are there and the floodplain that it exists in. As we move a little bit further in, we've got the southeastern plain. Anyone in the southeastern plain? Maybe you knew this before and maybe you didn't. So if you can find your county on this map, fun, new idea for you to understand. Yeah, so the southeastern plain again, right? So we're moving a little bit further inland, a little bit more upland, and so we have some upland forests, longleaf pine, shortleaf pine, still having that well-drained soil, but also moving into mixed forest. And so that's a combination of oak and hickory and pine. And so you're definitely going to have some of that fire-adapted ecosystems in these areas, as well as the alternative to that, because we're still, having some of that Mississippi runoff experience. We're still going to have some bottomland floodplain forests, so oak, gum, cypress forests, including some sweet bay and some maples. And then we move on to the interior plateau, which is obviously the vast majority of Tennessee. This is for all you Nashville folks. Did you know that you lived in the interior plateau? Probably. I'm going to assume that you did. And so the vast majority of the forests in this interior plateau are going to be mixed oak hickory. And so all of your different oak species, upland oaks, so white oak, red oak, black oak, as well as your hickories, so butternut hickory, shagbark hickory, and a mix of other trees as well. But we're going to understand as oak hickory landscape. And then continuing on to the east into the central and southeastern Appalachians. This is going to be mixed mesophytic forests. And so this is where we get a little bit more wet, a little bit more of that mountain effect, right? And so a cove forest is something that's, usually really protected. And so it's more moist. And so you have the tulip poplar and the maples and the basswoods that really enjoy those moist cove forest conditions. But you also have on the ridges, dry oak pine, dry oak and pine forests as well. And so that just goes to show kind of the difference that you can have in one area, two very different ecotypes. And so then moving on to the Ridge and Valley, even further to the east, this is also part of the Appalachians where we get more into the oak hickory and oak pine, a little bit drier, still fire adapted, and then into the Blue Ridge. Blue Ridge, which then faces the Piedmont further east, and so that is an oak hickory type as well, forest type. And so you might have mentioned, I said oak hickory, oak hickory, oak hickory over and over and over again. And so that's because looking at this, which is provided by the state of Tennessee Forestry Division, the vast majority of the forests in Tennessee are that oak hickory forest type. And so you can see some of the other ones that we discussed here, bottomland hardwoods, shortleaf pine, different oak pine, right? Different species, but oak hickory is the vast majority of the forest type in Tennessee. And so you're probably really familiar with the type of forest that is. But we're going to go a little bit more into that now. And so, yeah, oak hickory, they're known for being pretty diverse, right? And so they include red oak, white oak, as well as some other species like hemlock and maybe birch and some of those Virginia pines, stuff like that. But something interesting to think about is that the oak hickory um, forest type is actually a climax community when it comes to forest types. And so oak hickory is something that you can get when fire suppression exists in a landscape. And so the oak pine woodlands, which we also talked about, right, are going to be a little bit more sparse. And that fire aspect is allowing for a little bit more openness of the canopy. There's a lighter shrub layer. And it's being maintained by those intervals of fire that come through, depending on the site. But as fire suppression exists or fire doesn't come through, if places aren't allowed to burn, it's going to continue to build up. That canopy is going to continue to grow up and eventually shade out the pines and allow more shade tolerant species to grow up, which can actually include maple and things like that. And so these sites are usually dry, and that's something, and dry, and then, poor soils can also be something that limits the type of species that grow. That might limit like maples and basswoods coming in to this ecosystem. And then you have, the understory with different shrubs that are adapted to fire and like acidic soils where they can grow under pine needles. But again, like that fire exclusion, or if fire hasn't been present on the landscape for a long time, you're going to see this transition into more of a climax community, more hardwoods, less pines, and yeah, and without that, that's also something, without the fire, that can also create larger, more intense fires over time. And that's something that we see when fire has been suppressed for a really long time in fire adapted ecosystems, that sometimes those fires get out of control. And while it's great, oak hickory forests are wonderful. Having 67%, the vast majority of forests in the state being all one ecotype, a forest type, can actually cause, some issues in terms of wildlife habitat, right? So who gets to live there? What kind of species like to live in wider, more dispersed, open areas? That's a benefit not only for the wildlife itself, but also for, people, hunters, people who still, go out there and um, find their food on the landscape. And having a diverse mosaic, like we mentioned before, of allowing fire to come in and clear parts of a landscape and some areas being more mature, creating that mosaic is really important for many different species in order to move along and find different resources that they need. And so there are some species that are far more connected to different ecosystems. And so I'm curious if any of y'all heard about this project, which is the reintroduction of the red-cockaded woodpecker. And this is going to be happening at Savage Gulf State Park. So this is really exciting because longleaf pine ecosystems, especially old growth, they are very fire dependent. And so managing for these types of ecosystems is a little bit more intensive than it used to be. And so this is really exciting to be bringing back a species, a threatened species that has lost a lot of its ecosystem has been extirpated up until this point from Tennessee because of logging in the past, the removal of those pine trees from fire suppression, so that, more open landscape is now gone and too covered up in trees so that the woodpecker doesn't have what it needs, as well as the habitat fragmentation. And so this is a really exciting project. I hope y'all get to hear more about that coming up soon. But to get a little bit more into detail about what old growth forests are. And so these are posters which you can find on our website if you would like to reference back to these. These are on our resources page, looking at the difference between old growth features in a moist forest and a dry forest. And so recent discussions over defining old growth have transitioned a little bit more from the structure of the forest. So a lot of these components, just for the sake of what they are, and more the function of the forest itself. And so a couple of these things we can compare from side to side are going to be one, you want to look for multi-age stands. Right. And so you might enter a forest and see a lot of really large trees or really tall trees, or, think like they just look really good. They look really big. But they're all the same size, right? So you're walking through this forest and they're all just straight, the same size, same age is what that indicates. And so something that you're actually looking for will be an uneven aged forest. And so you want to see those big, really large trees. But it's also good to see that there are middle-aged trees, right? So a little bit smaller, but still growing really vigorously, as well as small trees that are growing up in gaps in the canopy. That indicates that the forest has been undisturbed by one large unnatural disturbance for an extended period of time, to a point where multiple generations of trees have been able to establish themselves. Another indicator of old forest is going to be the quantity of woody debris, large woody debris that there is on the ground, right? And so that's dead trees falling on the ground, that's large limbs that have fallen from the canopy onto the ground. What does that mean? That means that these areas are dynamic, it creates habitat. It allows for decomposition and nutrient cycling. And it also means that it's not being managed for a clean look. And that's something I think it's also important to remember when it comes to forests. A lot of people, you see a forest and there's down trees and their limbs. I think a lot of people get a little bit nervous. They think, oh, it's a fire hazard. It looks messy. That is the natural condition of a forest. And so we want to see those things. We want to see large trees fallen down, those root balls, sticking up in some cases. That's creating a microhabitat in itself. So dead trees are actually something that we love to see in an old growth forest. And so standing dead trees, as well as those large trees on the ground, are also going to be really important to see. And then two indicators for old growth trees themselves. While we might approach a tree again, right? So it's like really big. There are some other indicators to know whether it's actually old or if it's just growing on a really moist, rich site. And so if the tree is just growing straight up, it's really like the perfect example of what you would expect that tree to look like, but it's really big. It might not actually be that old. It might just have a lot of support from the surrounding soil, might be getting a lot of nutrients. Something that you want to look for is actually going to be a really dynamic canopy. And so if you look up into the tree, instead of just seeing like perfect branches kind of branching out, you're going to want to look for areas where those branches have broken off, right? Oh, my hand. You're going to look for the areas where the branches have broken off, areas where it's maybe looking a little bit more gnarled. And on that note as well, you're going to look for gnarled bark. And so the thing about really old growth trees is that oftentimes their bark looks different than the younger versions. It's more dynamic, more platy, you could say. It actually changes a little bit the way that it looks. And yeah, and so really like thinking about all of that, the point of all of these things, the function over the structure and these structural attributes, what those structural attributes are actually doing are providing habitat, are providing resilience and buffering, the changes, natural disasters, the changes in, weather, that place, the different generations of trees existing in one place is something that's creating resilience over time against the changes that we're going to continue to see. And so on that note, why should you care about old growth? Why are we here tonight? So yeah, some estimates are that there's less than 1% of that virgin old growth forest left, but it is still out there. It's still out there, and it matters for us to better understand them, to understand the impacts that they have. They're rare. And for that reason, we should look at them and they deserve to be protected. Additionally, maybe 6 or 7% of the second growth forest in the United States at this point is at an old growth maturity level. And so that's really important that we, continue to nurture those places and make sure that they exist because of the functionality that they have in creating habitat for different species, creating that mosaic, creating the ability for the ecosystem to continue, right? Sharing its seeds into the disturbed areas. Another really important quality of these old growth forests is carbon storage. It was a little bit of a misnomer a while ago. There were thoughts that young trees were capturing more carbon than old growth forests. But the thing is once you cut an old forest down, all of that carbon is gone, is re-released into the atmosphere. And so it doesn't really matter how fast these young trees are going, they're never going to catch up to an old growth forest in its current state. And so the point is to keep that carbon locked into itself and continuing to hold it in place and existing in and of itself as a carbon sink, but also just existing as it is. And there is a lot to be said for the right of these places to exist, for the fact that they exist, for the fact that they are organisms and they have a right to exist as well, the inherent right of these forests. And that might be, a spiritual, thought to some. It might be a new thought to some to think about forests as having inherent rights. And maybe that's a direction that we should be moving as a society, is recognizing the rights of these places to exist. Okay, and so with all of that being said, what is the Old Growth Forest Network? So we are creating a national network of protected old growth forests. And so we are finding forests in every forested county in the United States so that people can go and experience these places, see the beauty, understand them better, bring that knowledge with them back into their lives, and seeing the majesty, the importance, and all of the reasons why these places are worthy of protection. And we're excited to provide this resource for people so that they can get better educated. They can see these places, especially in some cases in their own backyard. And so this is our current network map. As you can see, we're a little bit highly represented in the Northeast. And it's my job as the Southeast Regional Manager to make all of those dots up there happen down in the Southeast. And so in Tennessee, we've got a couple of places. Specifically, Albright Grove in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. That's in Cook County. And so again, this is a hardwood cove forest. And so, a little bit more moist. The Smoky Mountains are one of the most popular national parks in the nation. And so it's really valuable and important. And knowing that something like this, an old growth grove like this, exists in this place, that so many people get to see and experience, is a really wonderful, wonderful thing. And so if you have not been specifically to Albright Grove in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, I'm going to recommend you go over there and check it out. You can go to their profile on our website, get a little bit more information. We've also have Falls Creek Falls state natural area, and that's in Van Buren County. And so again, we have a mesophytic cove forest, probably with some of that oak hickory existing here. I think I see, um, well, no, I'm not going to guess what that plant is right there. Maybe one of you can, since we're the Tennessee Native Plant Society. Um, but yeah, so another beautiful example, and what we really love is, the fact that these are places that are being managed, that are being protected, and a state natural area. That's something that the state of Tennessee has designated with the intention of protecting it for the people of Tennessee for long-term enjoyment, usage, protection of these places as reference sites so that we know how to restore other degraded places. And so a little bit more about what we're looking for, right? And so because we want to get more recognition for Tennessee in the network, what are some of our criteria? We're looking for one, obviously, old growth or mature second growth forest. Number two, it needs to allow public access. I'm sure there are some really wonderful old growth places out there, in some cases, virgin forests out there. If they don't have trails and you're not supposed to be there, we're not going to put them in the network. We don't want to invite people into places that they are not supposed to be. And so it needs to be open to the public. But we also are looking for places that are explicitly protected from commercial logging and timber harvesting. And so we have worked with different federal agencies to highlight lands in their care, as well as we saw before, state agencies who are protecting land, especially like the natural areas, different state parks. We also work with county and municipal groups who have their own landscapes that they are protecting. And so we do that by checking in on forest management plans. That's going to be something really important. And a lot of times, if it's a place that is explicitly managed for the ecological resource or for recreation, we're looking for places where logging is prohibited because logging is not the intention of that space. We also look at conservation easements and deed restrictions, and those are going to be legal documents that allow us to see what is and isn't allowed, and we look for places that are completely protected. And if those don't exist, we also create memorandum of agreements so that people can create their intention to protect these areas from commercial logging long term. And so we do actually have some dedications coming up soon. John Knoll at Bon Aqua State Natural Area in Hickman County, as well as Montgomery Bell State Park in Dixon County. And I think both of those are kind of close to Nashville. And so I hope maybe to see some of y'all there. It'll be a good time, and just really exciting to go out with people to get a little bit more information, share that information, share that education about these forests with the public. And so with that, what can you do? You can connect with us, one, by visiting these network forests, learning about them yourselves, spreading the good word about these old growth areas, bringing your friends and your family to these places, and educating yourself and others, which is what the Tennessee Native Plant Society does, which is wonderful. It's also very helpful if you nominate for us. We have a web page on our website where you can suggest forests that you think would be a good fit for the network, as in they are old, they're open to the public, and you believe they're protected from logging. That's what I do. I check on that and figure all of that stuff out. So if you find a place that is old growth, we want to hear about it. If you want to take a step up from that, you can volunteer as a county coordinator. And so volunteering as county coordinator means getting to be the boots on the ground in your local area to find forests, to check out forests. We work closely together to send you out to take a hike. Basically, that's what your job as the county coordinator is to hike around in these areas, find places, decide if they meet the criteria, specifically if they're mature enough, getting a little bit more information about that. Um, so please let me know if you'd be interested in volunteering as county coordinator. I'd love to hear from you. You can also sign up for our newsletter. Specifically, if you're interested in attending the dedications that I just mentioned, Bon Aqua and Montgomery Bell, signing up for our newsletter is going to be a great way for you to know when those events happen, as well as other events in Tennessee. I hope there's going to be a lot more coming up soon. Um, we also have a robust resources page, and our founder, Joan Maloof, has published a number of books that are really enjoyable reads. But we have some really great resources as well. And I would imagine that some folks on here are private landowners. And our resources page has some really great tools for you as a private landowner to get some thoughts on, things you can think about to ways to manage your personal, your private forest, and um, yeah, and just understanding better what to look for. And of course, not with us, but it's always a good idea to contact your state forestry agency or your soil and water conservation district as well. And finally, what's always really helpful for us as well is to just spread the word about the Old Growth Forest Network, especially if you enjoyed this presentation. I hope that you did. But sharing the word, especially about the resources, visiting our sites, and yeah, and spreading the good word that there are still old growth forests out there, that you can find them and you can go and visit them, and that we're working to share that information, share that education with as many people as possible. And so with that, thank you so much. Again, I'm Ciera Wilbur. I'm the Southeast Regional Manager with the Old Growth Forest Network. My email is down at the bottom. It's just ciera@oldgrowthforest.net. You'll also be able to find me on our staff page if you go to our website. So just want to say again, thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for attending tonight. And I would love to take some questions.
Ciera, that was an excellent presentation. Certainly helped to raise awareness of what Old Growth Forest Network's all about. Because we do a lot of hiking in our forest here in the state, we have a lot of boots on the ground already. And so hopefully we can feed back some information to you from our activities as well. So
Absolutely.
we have we have one question in the chat that came in recently, and that is, how do we know what a mature second growth is?
Yeah, great question. And so one, it's going to depend on the tree type, but a good rule of thumb is that 90, 90 years old is a pretty solid starting point. 70 to 90 is a good starting point, and beyond that is going to be even better, right? And so depending on the forest type, bald cypresses can live over 500 years old, and so even 90 is not necessarily old growth, but for a pine tree, 90 is going to be pretty old. So those are some of the differences as well.
Very good. Another question is Scott's Gulf Wilderness Area on the list?
No, we only have two in Tennessee so far. So if that is Scotts Gulf Wilderness is in Tennessee, it's not on our list so far. And so that's good to know. I'll look into that one, but this is why nominations from the public are so important to us, because this is how we find out about places. And I see something else about Frozen Head State Natural Area. Um, that is one that has been nominated before, and so that's one we're going to look into a little bit more. Um, but yeah, all of these suggestions are great, and finding out the history, looking more into the history of like when these places became state parks, when they were last logged is going to be really helpful in also determining the age of the forest. And so specifically for Montgomery Bell, we know that it was a Civilian Conservation Corps camp in the 40s, and then it was transitioned to state ownership in the state park. And so we know there, it has not been logged at least since the 40s, if not slightly before then, just as an example.
You mentioned Savage Gulf earlier, and I can tell you that there are pockets of old growth in Savage Gulf. It's a very large area, and we've had several new state parks that have recently been commissioned in that area. So I think there are a number of different possibilities. To what extent do you work with state parks to establish these old growth forests?
Yeah, we're very open to working with state parks. And so Montgomery Bell is a state park, and there's definitely a couple of others that we're interested in working with. It's more, you know, I'm trying to work with natural resource professionals who are doing a really amazing job and working really hard and are busy all the time to, get them into our network and talk a little bit more about that. So that's really, yes, the answer is yes. We love working with state parks. And the question is more so what the process, how long that takes, what kind of capacity they have to work with us as well.
Sure, sure. Another question is Hill Forest in Warner Park on your list?
It is. And I had heard, or last I had heard, was that it wasn't fully open to the public yet. I'm curious if anyone wants to comment on that. But yes, Warner Park as well is one that's on the list. They've also been really busy, and so I just spend a lot of my time chasing people down. And so I know that that entire Highland Rim around Nashville has some really amazing quality forests in there, and would love to work with them. And so if you guys have any connections to folks who are managing those areas, put in a good word for us. That always makes it helpful.
Yeah.
Um, how
I have a brief
large?
comment about the hill forest in Warner
Great.
Parks. That's it, most of it has been designated a state natural area that's set aside for scientific study and is likely to never be open to the general public because it is such a pristine Middle Tennessee forest. I've heard people from the state say it's the highest quality forest they've ever seen.
That's so
Um,
rare to
it,
see near an urban area. That's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah. Well, it was put in private ownership over 100 years ago and was never developed, never maintained. It still has down American chestnut trees from when the
Wow.
came through.
Wow. Yeah, that's something else. Thanks for that, Nick. Thanks for sharing that.
So a good
Yeah, so
question here.
maybe not Hill Forest, but maybe some of the others.
Another good question is how large an area in acres would you consider worthy of being on the old growth forest network?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. So the best way to describe it would be we want people to be able to enter a forest and actually feel like they're in a forest. And so like the minimum, the very minimum would be like 12 acres. But usually what we're looking for is to find a section of a larger forest that is protected, that has that old growth and has a trail going through so that it's a place that you can go to and experience that. Anything smaller, you're probably going to still, hear cars or like be able to see through the trees. And so that's what we're trying to avoid. We want people to be able to experience truly what it is to be in an old growth forest, have all of the sensory experiences as well. So I would say minimum 12, but preferably more, maybe like 12 acres within a larger area would be the most ideal.
Have you heard of Beeman Park?
I have not heard of Beeman Park. Is that one in Nashville as well?
I believe so. I think
Okay.
Bert Lyles submitted that question. If Bert, you could comment on that. Okay, well, let's
I,
move
I know
to
Beaman Park. Yeah, yeah.
it.
It's let's see, it's somewhere on the north side of Nashville. It's not very far out. And I've hiked there, and it has a visitor center, and it which brings you out into the canopy. You're standing in the building on the outdoor decks at the top of the canopy, and the forests and the trails um, are spectacular. And I think just my recollection is that it would qualify as an old growth forest. It looks utterly untouched.
That's incredible. Yeah, I will have to I don't think we have a nomination for that place. And so yeah, I'd love to hear about that. I need to try and take some notes. How about this? I'm going to request, would someone be willing to take note of all of these places and email them to me at this list right here, just so I don't have to
Yes,
move around my screen? Thank you so much.
we can do
Um,
that for you. We have a number of other good questions here and some good comments as
Great.
well. Let me refer back to one that you talked about earlier about Hill Forest. Susan Brown writes that guided educational tours and hikes are provided into Hill Forest by the Warner Park Nature Center staff and volunteers.
Great.
Okay. Um, there was a question about City Cove Creek Wilderness. Is that one on your radar?
I don't think I've heard of that one either. And by wilderness, is that a federal wilderness area, Jerry?
Yeah, it is.
Gotcha. Okay, great. Wonderful.
A question that may have occurred to some of us is, has there been resistance in some places to receiving that designation?
Fortunately, sometimes, yeah, and in some cases it's not a priority, right? There's a lot of other things that land managers have going on. In some cases, like with federal agencies, they have to be really specific about the kinds of ships or agreements that they have. And working directly with them is oftentimes not an option. And that doesn't mean that those places aren't old growth and that those protections aren't in place. And so, for the most part, people are very excited to. State agencies are usually really excited to, for the most part. But in some cases, yeah. And I think that just, is because people sometimes wonder like what's the catch? And there's really not a there's actually really not a catch, I think, in working with us. So we just keep trying to spread the good news.
So Tricia Bush indicates that Old Stone Fort rather has some of our favorite trees. I know that's a beautiful park. We've been there, we've hiked there. Are they on your radar?
No, I don't think that one is either. These are wonderful suggestions and great to know. I was speaking with um, someone with the state recently, and they said that, or maybe I read it. No, I think she said it to me. She said that the intention in Tennessee was so that there's enough natural and recreation areas that no one is more than 1 hour from a state park or state natural area anywhere in the state. And that's an incredible resource. So I love that.
Another person, Jerry Thornton, recommended Radnor Lake State Park in South
Have heard
Nashville
of Radnor.
due to the big old trees they have.
Yep, Radnor is on that list as well. So um, hopefully with all of these suggestions, we'll be able to come and get one of those in the network and come and visit y'all sometime soon.
Very good. Brent Miller says Alliance to Conserve National's Highland Rim Forest, an effort to preserve and put in land trust other options, the western and northern Highland Rim Forest around the interior basin.
Yeah, absolutely. If any of y'all know any of the folks who are in there, I unfortunately haven't had the best of luck in getting in sustained contact with them. And so if y'all know anyone, I would love an introduction. That's the kind of thing that is always welcome and helpful for us.
Very good. If I missed anyone who had a comment or question, please go ahead. If not, Sierra, we really appreciate the great presentation. We can certainly see that you are committed to old growth forest and helping us to preserve them. And we thank you so much for spending the time with us tonight. I'm sure everyone would join me in saying that this has been a high quality experience. And we look forward to working with you in the future as we go forward. Uh, so we did get a late question here. Could we get your map slides? So if you can send those to me, I can make those available.
Right, yes. Please remind me via email. That would be great.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed this experience as well, and so I hope to be in touch with some of y'all as county coordinators. If you have any questions, please stay in touch.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And so we're going to say good night, everyone, and we hope you'll join us for our next seminar in March.